Hi everyone. Okay, it's time for us to get started on Lecture 2. We will pick up where we left off previously. So we talked previously about hunting and gathering, and we said that there were some limitations to this. Had to keep a small population size. The humans had to move around a lot because they were following the food. They were very dependent upon nature, and if you think about it, hunting would also be really dangerous. So you would have people going up against these really large critters that they were trying to hunt down for food, and of course the critters were going to fight back. So you could really get hurt, and back in the day, there wasn't medicine the way we have today, so it definitely was dangerous. And so shifting to agriculture offered a lot of benefits. So as we shifted to more agriculture, keep in mind that this wasn't the flip of a switch necessarily. It did take time, and some societies shifted and others didn't. But there were some serious advantages. First of all, by having a food surplus, you could support more people in a population. Okay? So additionally, you don't have to carry your young around, so you can have larger families. Excuse me. Additionally, agriculture could be less dangerous. Okay? And because you're not nomadic anymore, you don't need to move around as much. All right, so all of these offered a definite advantage to the hunting and gathering lifestyle. Now, all of this was long before written record, okay, but we do know some interesting things based on genetic patterns. So one instance of this, which is pretty cool, is that researchers have found that ancient farmers and hunter-gatherers might have actually traded pigs, okay? So using DNA data, okay, the scientists realized that, as we said, it was an immediate switch from going to hunting gathering to agriculture, and some societies would stay one way and the others would stay the other way, and they would actually trade back and forth, which is pretty cool. So they definitely interacted with each other. Okay, so one thing that we might consider is that agriculture did impact nature quite drastically. So one example would be that when you're farming an area, you are going to either eliminate or move the species out of the area that you're going to use to farm. So one example is the greater prairie chicken, and we will talk about that in the next couple slides. A bunch of native plants would get moved out, of course. One example of this, which I'm from Illinois originally, and Illinois is known as the prairie state. However, we've lost about 99.8% of our prairie, sadly. And the way this happened is that people moved in and realized that the area was really fertile. And because of that, they wanted to use it for farmland. Well, the problem was it was very wet, and prairies are supposed to be wet. Well, they used what are called drainage tiles, and drainage tiles are nothing more than pipes with holes in them. And then what happens is the water falls into the drains into the pipes, okay, because they have holes in them, and then that water is carried to the ditches, and the ditches take them to the stream, and so forth. But what this does is it drastically changes the landscape, but of course all the plants and animals that used to depend on that are then moved out. So because we don't have many prairies left, you might not realize exactly how many species of prairie would have. So here we have a prairie pictured up on the upper left, and you can see there's a lot of diversity, all sorts of different plants, there's a bunch of different animals running around there. And then shift that to a farm field, and it's boring. That's what I grew up seeing, everyone, corn, okay? It transitions to a monoculture, meaning that there's only one species, all right? And so it's good for the cows and good for the humans, but doesn't really do the prairies much good. One species that was pretty negatively impacted is known as the greater prairie chicken. And so the prairie chicken is pictured on the upper right. Aren't they cute? I will upload a video because they have the cutest little mating dance that the males try to do for the females, and it's absolutely adorable. And you gotta see the mating dance, okay? Now, prairie chickens used to be found in the area that was that light purple, okay? Then eventually that was their past distribution. Over time, they started to get restricted to just tall grass prairie. That's the medium purple. And now their current distribution is the really dark purple. And as you can see, if you find Illinois, they used to be all over the place. Now, not so much. Okay, so make sure that when you guys have time, you check out the second video that I will include in our announcement for this lecture. So as humans switched over to agriculture, we started to modify many different species to better suit us. One great example of this is corn. Okay, so the corn or maize that we know and love today looks much like the corn plant on the left, okay? But what you may not realize is that they came from a plant called teosinte, which is found on the right. And you can see there's a lot of differences between the two plants, okay? For example, corn has one main stalk. Teosinte has many. Corn focuses a lot of effort in the ears, okay? So you see the ears are the big ears that are pictured in the left part of the upper right picture, whereas teosinte is on the right part of the upper right picture, okay? And you can see that the ears don't have a lot of kernels, and so they look very different. And that's all due to artificial selection, which is basically just humans selecting for traits that we want to see in the corn plants, okay? So one main stalk, putting a lot of energy towards the corn rather than the plant, and having those big yellow ears that we love today. Now, the next time you guys go to the grocery store, I want you to look for a particular group of vegetables, okay? And I want you guys to find where the broccoli is located, the cauliflower, cabbage, Brussels sprouts, kale, and kohlrabi. So they tend to be grouped together in the grocery stores, and the reason is because of the fact they all initially came from wild mustard. So the wild mustard plant is pictured in the middle. All right, so what happened is that humans artificially selected for traits. For example, in broccoli, they selected for flowers and stems. In cauliflower, they selected for flower clusters. In cabbage, they selected for a terminal bud. Brussels sprouts, lateral buds. Kale for the leaves, and then kohlrabi for the stems. They're all, different species now, but initially they all came from one. And again, humans did this completely, okay, because we were selecting for these certain traits. Now, the strawberries that you see in grocery stores today have also been through artificial selection by humans, okay? So initially they were written about by the ancient Egyptians and by Darwin and so forth, and they were described as being small and flavorful, okay? So if you go to the grocery store today, the strawberries you tend to see are much larger, okay, and different traits have been selected for. So color, okay, and size and flavor, not as much. I don't think they're as flavorful as they used to be. But what we see in the grocery stores are actually a hybrid of a species from Europe, I believe, as well as a species from South America. Okay, and so that tends to be the strawberries that we find in grocery stores. Oh, they were also selected for durability, so they could be shipped from one area to the next without getting bruised or destroyed. Believe it or not, tomatoes have also been under artificial selection by humans for a really long time. So it's thought that tomatoes initially came from the plant pictured in the upper right, okay, or a relative of that. And you can see that they've been selected for size and shape and color and taste and durability. Initially, they tended to all be uniform in the grocery store, at least when I was growing up as a kid. But these days, they have what are called heirloom tomatoes, okay, that tend to have a lot more genetic variety and so forth. I will tell you that as a gardener, I've planted heirloom tomatoes, and I swear I've got the thumb of death when it comes to them. They're not as durable, they're not as easy to raise, and I don't have as good a luck with them. So for those of you that can raise heirloom tomatoes, my hat's off to you. I sure can't do it. But you do see them in grocery stores these days, and they do tend to have different colors and shapes and sizes and flavors and so forth. So that part's pretty cool. So what I'd like you to consider now is what other types of critters have been domesticated by humans. So I'd like you to pause the lecture, maybe make a list of 3 or 4 things that humans have domesticated. Now, when we talk about domestication, this means that they've been genetically altered to better suit humans, okay? And we'll cover more of that later on this semester. But what other critters do you think have been domesticated in one way or another by humans? So when we talk about domestication, it doesn't necessarily mean it has to be something that we've eaten either. Okay, so one example is cotton. Now, cotton used to look like you can see the 2 fluff balls. When cotton started out, initially it looked like the smaller cotton ball on the left. Okay, but over time, through artificial selection, you can see that cotton got much larger and then had a lighter color, probably because it was easier to dye different colors. Okay. Hemp also has been domesticated over the years, and back in World War II, hemp was used to make ropes, and so it was selected for to have much stronger fibers and so forth. So domestication doesn't necessarily mean just for eating. It means that we better bred it to suit humans one way or another a little bit better. Now, domestication can have some negative impacts. So I don't know if any of you are really into finding out your heritage or where your ancestors came from. But if any of you have relatives that came from Ireland, there's a chance that domestication negatively impacted your family, and that might have been what brought you to the United States. So there was what's known as the Irish famine, okay, Irish potato famine. And what happened is there was a pathogen that caused all of the potatoes to rot in the ground before they could be picked. In Ireland, and of course, potatoes were a main source of food. So back in the day, when this blight struck, many people had to move elsewhere, okay, to be able to survive and be able to have food. And I actually had a family friend whose family was Irish, and he was much older. He passed away a few years ago, and he was very, very old. Lived a good long life, but his parents came over because of the Irish famine. That's how his family ended up being here. So the reason this one blight managed to take out all of these different potatoes is because they were all genetically uniform, because people had bred them to have these traits. And so it got to the point where there wasn't a lot of genetic variation left, and so the pathogen could just come in and sweep and just take out all the potatoes. So anybody has a history, it's always pretty interesting. At least I think it is. My dad was a history teacher. I don't know if you all can tell or not, but it tends to creep in the lectures every once in a while. So, interesting fun fact. Well, now it's an interesting fun fact. Back in the day, it was quite sad, but scientists did manage to locate the pathogen that caused this famine and may have caused many people to move to the U.S. Interesting. Now, one of my favorite examples of domestication is the domestication of wolves, which turned them into dogs that we know and love today. So the reason this is one of my favorite examples is because I have 4 of these critters running around my house. One of them is sleeping right next to me right now. But humans we now have about 300 and something breeds of dogs, and humans created all of them. Okay, so they did all come from the gray wolf. That's a common ancestor. Now, the first dogs to be bred were very often used in hunting, okay, or some sort of working dog. And so many of the dogs, for example, in India, helped with hunting, as well as Europe, North America, and so forth. And it wasn't until later on where we got the cute little frou-frou dogs, and I can say that too because the one sleeping next to me is considered a frou-frou dog. But those were bred later and tended to be more companion animals, okay? But all of them really did have common ancestors in the wolves. So as we said, there's about 350 dog breeds today. Many of them were initially used to perform tasks. They've been bred and artificially selected for the last 200 years. Research has shown that they have selected 44 genetic regions have been influenced by humans, and humans have selected for things, a lot of it morphology, like the body size and coat color and so forth, but other traits have been selected for and against as well. There are other traits with regards to behavior that humans have selected either for or against. So humans have selected, of course, for tameness, okay? Additionally, they selected for dogs to be sensitive to human behavior. I don't know about any of you, but some of my dogs, it seems like, can read my mind. Really, they tend to pay attention to our body movements, and they can kind of tell what's going on based on just watching us. Dogs were also selected as certain traits like having a desire to please us. Okay, now I have a cat as well, and I can tell you she does not care whether or not I'm pleased. Some cats do, mine does not. She just kind of does her own thing, and we'll talk about why cats are quite so different later on. But when it comes to dogs, these traits were definitely selected for, whereas aggressiveness was selected against, okay? Dogs that had ignored humans, they didn't tend to get bred either. And so certain traits were selected for, while others were selected against, and this helped to, create the breeds that we know and love today. So what we're showing here, and no, you don't have to know or, memorize. Goodness, don't even think about that. Spend too much time on this figure. But what I'm wanting to show you is this is a heat map, okay? And what a heat map does is it shows what different genes are shared between certain groups and that are turned on and turned off. Okay, so what I want you to get out of this, for example, is the hunting group of dogs all seem to share a similar group of genes. That's why they are lined up across the top, similarly to across down the side. Okay, so that big patch of red that happens to be located in almost the bottom right corner, and you see hunting group, they all share those genes and they're all regulated similarly. The terrier group. I don't know if any of you have ever seen Westies or Cairn Terriers or Terriers, but they were made to actually go after rodents and kill rodents. They all share a similar set of genes. Okay, and so then there's, other groups as well. So they all, the herding group, they all share similar genes, and they all perform similar tasks. So there is a reason that certain dogs will behave certain ways, because genes tend to be selected for, because that's the job that we wanted them to have, which is pretty cool if you think about it. Again, this all happened in only 200 years, so how awesome is that? So we've said that artificial selection is when you have traits that we are selecting for, or potentially against. In order for artificial selection to happen, okay, there have to be a couple of traits or a couple of things that must be going on. First off, you have to have variation in your genetic variation in your population. Okay, so if you don't have any variation, everybody's the same, there's nothing to select for or against. Secondly, the variation must be heritable. Heritable means it can be passed on from one generation to the next. Now, pigeons are a great example of this. Okay, you can see, and pigeons are partially where Darwin got his idea of natural selection and evolution, because he noticed that pigeon breeders would select for certain traits like plumage and behavior and so forth, and all of that again was driven by humans. Okay, but in order for that to happen, had to have variation, and that variation had to be passed on from one generation to the next. Now, I've said it before, I love cats, okay, and I love my cat. But they really don't share the same behaviors as dogs. And there's this old saying that, if you die, a dog will mourn you, whereas a cat will eat you. I always found this to be funny. I think my cat would be sad if I died, but really, who knows? But the reason cats behave so differently is because they were actually selected from much different traits. Okay, so cats started hanging out with us when we started to grow grain. And what happened is that grain attracted rodents. Well, we wanted to get rid of the rodents, and cats were really good at that. So they started hanging out with us, and we started breeding them so they would go after the rodents in our grain. You can find records of cats tens of thousands of years ago. Cats were revered in Egypt, probably because of the fact they chased away the rats, which carried diseases and so forth. And so ultimately, it was this win-win situation. Now again, cats were not bred for tameness. They were not bred to pay attention to our behavior. They were not bred to please us. My cat likes to hang out with us, but she's a lot less dependent on us than our dogs are. They were selected to be hunters. That's why they call them mini panthers. Okay, and so they hunt rodents, and rodents carry disease. So there was this win-win situation where we would feed them and take care of them, and they would, get rid of all of our pest problems. Well, recently people started to breed cats for certain traits, but really nothing like the dogs. Okay, and I'm talking like physical traits. I think they have Scottish fold cats now, and Siamese and all sorts of different cats. But again, they're not bred for quite like the dogs. It'll be interesting to see what happens in the future, because like everything else, that they'll change too. So plants and animals were domesticated through artificial selection, okay? And again, to be domesticated, you have to select for or against certain traits, okay, that make them better to live closer to humans. Now, the hypothesis with regards to where domestication started is an area known as the Fertile Crescent, and if you can see here, it's located in green in the area that was the Mesopotamia. You can see the Sahara Desert and so forth in the Mediterranean Sea, but it gives you an idea where it's been suggested that domestication started. So from again, history, it's pretty cool. So if you think of all the critters that have been domesticated in one way or another, to benefit man, we tend to think of cows and corn and wheat and chickens and so forth, a lot of those that we use for food in addition to those that we use for companionship and so forth. So basically, if you walk into a grocery store, anything and everything in the grocery store has been domesticated, okay, and has been selected for or against. And so I always kind of roll my eyes with people who insist they want all natural. Really, it hasn't been all natural for thousands of years. We started domesticating critters a long time ago, but that will be for, when it comes to GMOs and all that other good stuff, that will be for another lecture down the road. Okay, so just keep this in mind, though, the next time you guys go to the grocery store. So you might be asking yourself, why were certain animals domesticated while others weren't? And I would say, aha, that is an excellent question. Well, there are a lot of examples with this. So we domesticated horses, and we've said that before, but we haven't really domesticated zebras. And I don't know if any of you all have heard, but zebras tend to be very nasty tempered, okay? And they've actually been known in zoos to bite their handlers and then not want to let go until they're dead. Anything that has that kind of a temper, I don't really want. I'm not going to lie. Humans have domesticated reindeer, but not elk, okay? And the reason for that is elk get very panicky, and if you try to enclose them, they will slam themselves against the wall trying to get out until they die sometimes. That's how drastic it is. Whereas reindeer tend to be a little bit more calm, okay? Another example of this might be almonds versus oak acorns, okay? So we definitely have domesticated almonds. We see almond milk all over the place. Whether it's really that healthy or not, I don't know. Okay. However, you might ask yourself, why don't we harvest acorns? Okay, because they're all over the place. And I would say, oh, that's an excellent question. Well, I don't know if you all have walked through campus after it's rained, okay, and let's say the leaves are on the ground and it's fall, and you kick a leaf off of a sidewalk and you notice it's an oak leaf, okay, and there's an imprint underneath. Well, that imprint, those are what are called tannins. And oak plants have a lot of tannins, and the whole purpose of them is to keep insects and other herbivores from eating them. Well, tannins will make us sick too. Okay, so the reason we can't consume acorns is they're filled with tannins and they will make us ill. So the way Native Americans used to use acorns is they would take them and grind them up and then rinse and rinse and rinse and rinse them off, have water flow through the powder to try to get it clean. So then they could get rid of the tannins and then they could use the flour for baking. Okay, so that's probably the only way we can really use acorns. You'll see squirrels are adapted. They don't care. They just eat them anyway. However, squirrels and oak trees have been associated for quite a long time, and so their little stomachs can actually handle the tannins, whereas ours can't. But that's why some animals are domesticated and others aren't. Okay? Interesting. Now, there are some downsides to agriculture and domestication, and one of them is the fact that we can very often get diseases from our critters, okay? And this, of course, should ring true right about now. I should update the slide one of these days. Measles and tuberculosis likely came from cattle diseases that transferred over. Influenzas likely came from pigs. Smallpox could have come from camels or cattle. So a lot of the diseases that really impacted us likely came from the critters that we domesticated and started to have a close association with. So, there's definitely some downsides to the domestication. I would say it's still worth it, though, given the fact that we're surviving much better because of our creatures. Unfortunately, this domestication and living in cities and so forth had a huge impact on humans, okay, particularly on Native American populations. Now, my husband and I always joke with each other because he has really high percentage of Native American blood in him, and my family traced our ancestors, I don't know, when they were doing it back in the day for a habit, and apparently ancestors were among the first settlers. So my husband always teases me and tries to make me feel guilty, and succeeds, because the settlers brought over a lot of diseases with them. And so one hypothesis with regards to what happened to the Native American populations, in addition to the fact they were not treated well by settlers, the later settlers anyway, and a lot of their resources were hunted to extinction, like the bison, not exactly extinction, but close to it, and so forth, is the fact that the settlers brought over a bunch of diseases with them. And so when they ran into the Native Americans, they had never lived in urban areas or close association with animals the way the pioneers did as when they crossed over and so forth. And so unfortunately, we gave the Native Americans a lot of diseases. And the hypothesis is that might have helped wipe out some of the populations, which is really sad. So my husband teases me a lot about that, and I do feel guilty. Sorry. Anyway, so this is the end of our lecture for today. Okay, so I hope you guys find this interesting, and then on Sunday I will load, if all goes well, I will load up 2 more lectures for you guys, and you'll be asked to listen to them through the week. And then before you panic, there is a quiz. Now, the reason is we have to have a quiz every other week, okay? If you listen to lecture and you paid attention, it's open note, open book, you'll be fine. Okay, so don't stress about it. And don't panic that there's a quiz. It's very simple, very easy. Open note, open book, listen to lecture, take notes. It's all good. Okay. And I will make sure that you guys have plenty of time to complete the quiz. If you have any questions, please let me know. I look forward to chatting with you all again soon. So stay safe, everybody.